Thank you, Chair. I'm really glad to be moving the Green Amendment to the Mayor's budget. Each part of our amendment seeks to empower London's communities to take even more action on the challenges they face and address some gaps in the Mayor's policies. Gaps where he could and should be going further to tackle some of London's biggest problems, and gaps between the words in his press releases and the funding in his draft budget for the actual programmes, and gaps where he's not applying enough funding to make sure that some of his good policies are properly resourced and enforced. Our amendment will empower Londoners living in social housing using 1.5 million from the GLA's earmarked reserves over 3 years to appoint a social housing commissioner, a bit like the walking and cycling commissioner, provide more viability training for community groups, and recruit a dedicated ballots officer. It will draw up an emergency climate plan and extend the Mayor's group buying scheme for solar panels to all boroughs using £650,000 from the Capital Programme Reserve. It will increase funding for school air pollution audits using £750,000 of the congestion charge revenue. It will support community groups working towards ultra-low emission zone compliance by setting up a 15 million and cut reoffending, making use of the GLA's 8 million share of the surplus on the business rates levy account. The resourcefulness and energy of Londoners to tackle the city's problems is truly inspiring. But they need a mayor leading the charge at City Hall with properly funded programmes and policies without any gaps or loopholes. The mayor has a record of taking up our good green ideas. He set up the £45 million Young Londoners Fund after our budget amendment last year, which responded to his call for suggestions as to how to allocate council tax and business rate returns. We're sure he's listening today. My colleague, Assembly Member Berry, will second the amendment and will speak to our proposals for a social housing commissioner and our proposals to support young people. I will now speak to our proposals that take forward our work to push climate change and workers' rights up the Mayor's agenda. On the 11th of December, the Mayor declared a climate emergency, just days after the Assembly passed my motion urging him to declare one. The Assembly and the Mayor deserve credit for showing real leadership here. But the Mayor's declaration must be backed by the specific plans and actions that this Assembly called for. On the 11th of December, the Mayor published new carbon targets, but what he actually published shows that he's still working to a 2050 timetable, not 2030, as a deadline to make London carbon neutral. I followed up with him about progress to bring forward his carbon targets to 2030 in Mayor's Question Time last week. At the very end of my questioning, he said, and I quote, "We can do the work in relation to what's needed by 2030, and that work is taking place." But then this morning, he seemed weirdly reluctant to actually do this extra work. The Budget and Performance Committee has picked up on this, and despite declaring a climate emergency, the Mayor has not allocated any funding for the extra work that's needed for that. This is a glaring inconsistency, and the Mayor should note that we've all picked up on it. So part 2 of our amendment funds the work needed to draw up a proper emergency plan so the Mayor knows what funding and powers he needs to seek from government. We propose urgent work to update the current climate change mitigation and energy section of the Mayor's environment strategy and the adaptation measures that London will need to cope with extreme weather events associated with rapid global warming. This work will be supported with a budget of £405,000 funded from the Capital Programme Reserve. Now, we love the Mayor's Solar Together programme. It's a group buying scheme for solar panels to bring down costs, but it only covers a third of boroughs so far. We propose extending its reach to cover all 33 boroughs at a cost of £245,000, also funded through the Capital Programme Reserve, helping the Mayor to hit his own target of 1 gigawatt of installed capacity by 2030. And then moving on to air pollution. To date, the Mayor has provided 50 London schools located in areas with the very worst levels of nitrogen dioxide and particulate matter with air quality audits. These identify measures needed to cut children's pollution exposure that triggers asthma and other long-term and over the long term stunts children's lung growth. The tailored measures that the audits recommend include no idling, engine idling schemes, better layouts to local roads, restricting the most polluted vehicles around schools, green infrastructure barriers, enabling students to walk and cycle along less polluted routes, etc. Now, the Mayor has identified another 150 primary and secondary schools in very polluted areas, yet they have not had these audits. Every London pupil should be able to trust the air they breathe, and this clean air postcode lottery is not okay. Yet it's only by carrying out the audits at the schools that the Mayor has identified that he can actually tackle this. So we're therefore proposing, in part 3 of our amendment, a £750,000 fund paid for with congestion charge income to extend the Mayor's air quality audits to all of these most polluted schools. He's only done a quarter of them so far, so he's going to cover off the last 3 quarters. And many schools and charities use specially adapted minibuses to transport children, disabled and older people around London. The Mayor has put a welcome sunset period in place in his ULEZ proposals, but groups still want to upgrade their vehicles as soon as they can, so they are not worsening the health of their users and other Londoners. Many of these not-for-profit organisations do not have the financial resources to update their minibuses, and this part of our amendment will give their fundraising a real boost by match funding at a 2-to-1 ratio minibus upgrade projects that are listed on Space Hive, which is the Mayor's crowdfunding platform. So in part 4, we're proposing a £15 million fund to help these organisations to upgrade their old polluting minibuses with replacement clean vehicles that meet the emission standards of the Mayor's ultra-low emission zone. This fund will mean that cash-strapped community and voluntary groups can keep providing these essential services in clean vehicles that don't pollute their local surroundings. Now, we're all very aware of the work going on in this building to provide access to desks, space for working, collaboration and meetings in this building that actually feels more crowded by the day. Our amendment at part 5 includes a call for the Chief Officer at City Hall to allocate £100,000 from their transformation fund to a study into the potential benefits of moving to a 4-day working week at the GLA without cuts to pay. More and more businesses, the latest being the Wellcome Trust, are seeing the huge benefits to the productivity of their organisation and to the health and well-being of their staff by organising a working week on 4 days' work for a full week's pay, leaving employees with more time for community volunteering, caring responsibilities, and simply staying well and healthy. Ever since the formation of the working week, the idea of what constitutes reasonable hours and working conditions has been evolving. We have tools like computers and options for working differently that simply didn't used to exist. It makes absolute sense for the Chief Officer to look at what a 4-day week on a full week's pay would offer both to GLA employees and to this organisation. The GLA as a public sector body should be leading the way on working conditions. The living wage came from the Assembly and we could be pioneers on a 4-day working week.